At 3 Souter in the morning on February 15th, 1929, the hallway of the 4th floor of the Lexington Hotel in Chicago was quiet, but it was not peaceful. The silence was heavy, pressurized, the kind of quiet that usually precedes the racking of a slide on a Thompson submachine gun. The air smelled of stale cigar smoke, floor wax, and the distinct copper tang of nervous sweat. Standing on either side of the double mahogany doors of the presidential suite were two men who, under any other circumstances, would have already killed each other. On the left stood Luca the Knife Brasi, a man whose loyalty to the Southside Italian mob was written in the scars across his knuckles. On the right stood Tommy Two-Gun O'Shea, a North Side enforcer with a derby hat pulled low over eyes that hadn't blinked in 20 minutes. They didn't speak. They didn't smoke. They just stared at the brass doorknob, waiting. Inside that room, the most dangerous ritual in the history of the Chicago underworld was taking place. It wasn't a hit. It wasn't a sit-down. It was a wedding night. But this was no ordinary consummation. In the bedroom beyond those doors, Lucia Moretti, the 22-year-old daughter of the city's most powerful Don, and Danny the mechanic O'Banion, the volatile leader of the Irish North Side, were not just expected to sleep together, they were expected to perform. They were expected to seal a blood pact that would stop a war that had turned the Chicago snow red for 3 years. The terms of the Treaty of Lexington were explicit, drafted by lawyers who usually defended murderers. The marriage had to be consummated, witnessed by ear, if not by eye, and confirmed 3 times before dawn. Only then would the shipments of Canadian whiskey be released. Only then would the hit orders be rescinded. To the outside world, this was a romance. To the men in the hallway, it was a hostage exchange. And to Lucia Moretti, the woman inside the room, it was something else entirely. It was a takeover. History would remember this night as the moment the balance of power shifted from the barrel of a gun to the edge of a bedsheet. But before the door locked, before the whispers began, Chicago had to bleed. To understand why the fate of a city rested on what happened between 2 sets of satin sheets, you have to look at the week that preceded it. February 1929 was the coldest month on record, both meteorologically and metaphorically. The wind coming off Lake Michigan was like a razor, cutting through the wool coats of the beat cops and the silk dresses of the flappers alike. But the real chill came from the North Clark Street garage. Just 24 hours before this wedding night, on St. Valentine's Day, 7 men from the O'Banion faction had been lined up against a brick wall and machine-gunned into hamburger meat. The massacre was supposed to be the end of the North Side gang. It was supposed to be a decapitation strike ordered by Lucia's father, Don Salvatore Moretti. It failed. Danny O'Banion, the target, had been late. A flat tire, a lucky break, or perhaps a divine intervention had kept him away from the garage. He survived, and his rage was nuclear. The city braced for a retaliation that would burn Chicago to the ground. The mayor was terrified. The police were paid off, but even they couldn't hide the bodies piling up in the gutters. The federal government was watching. The underworld economy, a delicate ecosystem of bootleg gin, numbers rackets, and union control, was on the brink of total collapse. Business cannot function in a slaughterhouse. And so, the Commission, the shadowy board of directors that governed organized crime from New York to Chicago, intervened. They offered an ultimatum: peace or annihilation. There would be a merger, a literal merger of flesh and blood. Don Salvatore would give his only daughter, his most prized possession, to the man he had tried to kill, and Danny O'Banion would accept her as payment for his dead men. It was a medieval solution to a modern problem. Lucia Moretti was not the blushing bride the society pages described. At 22, she was already a legend in the speakeasies of the Loop. They called her the Black Widow of the South Side, though never to her face. She had been engaged twice before. Her first fiancé, a promising young capo, died when his car brakes failed on a curved road. Her second, a banker who laundered money for the family, was found floating in the Chicago River with his pockets full of stones. Lucia wore black for a month, then went back to wearing red. She was educated, having spent 2 years at a finishing school in Switzerland that taught her how to pour tea and how to spot a liar in 3 languages. She was her father's daughter. Beautiful, yes, but with eyes that assessed every room for exits and weapons. Don Salvatore viewed her as an asset, a high-value bond to be cashed in when the market was right. He didn't ask her if she wanted to marry Danny O'Banion. He told her, "You get in that bed," Salvatore had whispered to her in his study, the smoke from his cigar wreathing his head like a storm cloud. "And you keep him happy. You keep him distracted. You are the wiretap in his bedroom, Lucia. You report to me." Lucia had looked at her father, adjusting the pearl necklace that cost more than a senator's annual salary. "And if he kills me, Papa, he knows you tried to blow him up yesterday." "He won't kill you," Salvatore said, dismissing her life with a wave of his hand. "He needs the whiskey roots. You are the key to the warehouse. Just do your duty." Danny O'Banion was a different animal entirely. If the Morettis were old-world aristocracy, sipping wine and quoting Machiavelli, Danny was the new American predator. He grew up in the stockyards smelling of blood and manure. He earned his nickname, the Mechanic, not because he fixed cars, but because he had a genius for improvised explosives. He didn't negotiate, he detonated. He was rough, scarred, and hated Italians with a tribal intensity. To him, Lucia Moretti was a spoil of war, a trophy to be put on a shelf to show the city that he had beaten the great Don Salvatore. The arrangement was set. The wedding would be quick, quiet, and legally binding. But the Treaty of Lexington had a clause that made the lawyers sweat. The Moretti family did not trust the Irish to honor the deal once they had the girl. The O'Banion crew did not trust the Italians not to slip a stiletto into Danny's ribs once the lights went out. The distrust was so toxic that a verification protocol was established. The couple would be sequestered in the Lexington Hotel. The exits would be barred. 2 witnesses, one from each side, would stand guard, and the marriage had to be consummated undeniably, audibly, and repeatedly before the sun came up. It was a humiliation designed to strip them of their pride, to reduce them to breeding stock. Or so the old men thought. The wedding ceremony took place in the back room of a funeral home on Holstead Street, a fitting venue for a marriage born of a massacre. There were no flowers, only wreaths left over from the Valentine's wake. The guests were men with bulges under their tuxedo jackets, eyeing each other across the aisle. The priest, a man who smelled of sacramental wine and fear, rushed through the Latin rites, his hands shaking as he held the Bible. Lucia wore a dress of white silk, imported from Paris, but the neckline was high, severe. She wore no veil. She wanted to look her enemy in the eye. When she walked down the aisle, the floorboards creaking under the weight of the silence, she didn't look at her father. She looked at Danny. He was standing at the altar, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was too tight in the shoulders. He had a bruise on his jaw from a recent brawl. He looked at her, not with lust, but with a cold, appraising stare. He was buying a car, checking the engine. "Do you take this man?" the priest stammered. Lucia didn't blink. "I take what is mine." The nuance was lost on the room, but Danny caught it. His eyes narrowed slightly. After the ceremony, there was no reception, no cake, no first dance. The couple was ushered immediately into a waiting convoy of armored Cadillacs. The drive to the Lexington Hotel was a military operation. Police motorcycles, paid for with Moretti silver, cleared the streets. The city of Chicago blurred past the windows, a landscape of gray slush, neon signs, and shadows. Inside the car, Danny and Lucia sat on opposite sides of the leather bench seat. They hadn't spoken a word to each other since the altar. Danny lit a cigarette, the flare of the match illuminating the scar on his cheek. "Your old man thinks he's clever," he said, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "Locking us up like dogs in a kennel. He thinks I won't strangle you the second I get the chance." Lucia turned to look at him. She didn't flinch at the threat. She reached over, took the cigarette from his lips, and took a drag herself. The smoke curled from her mouth, framing her face in a gray haze. "My father thinks a lot of things, Mr. O'Banion," she said, her voice cool, cultured, but with a steel core. "He thinks you're a brute who can only think with his fists. He thinks I'm a frightened little girl who will do as she's told." She handed the cigarette back to him. "We have 12 hours in that room. We can spend them killing each other and give my father exactly what he wants, or we can figure out how to survive." Danny stared at her. The cigarette burned down between his fingers. He had expected tears. He had expected pleading. He hadn't expected a negotiation. "Survive," he scoffed. "I'm the one with the army, sweetheart. You're the hostage." "You have an army of dead men," Lucia corrected him. "7 of your best lieutenants are currently cooling in the morgue. You have no supply lines. You have no money coming in. You're the king of the north side, but your castle is burning. You need this alliance more than I do." The car hit a pothole, jolting them. Danny didn't move. He was listening now. "And what do you need, princess?" Lucia looked out the window at the looming facade of the Lexington Hotel. "I need to not be a widow for the third time, and I need to run this city, not watch it from a window." The car screeched to a halt. The doormen, actually O'Banion soldiers in borrowed uniforms, rushed to open the doors. The paparazzi were held back by a cordon of police, their flash bulbs popping in the night like distant gunfire. This was the public spectacle phase of the ritual. The city had to see them enter. The city had to know the treaty was active. Lucia stepped out onto the sidewalk. The wind whipped her dress. She grabbed Danny's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Smile, Danny," she whispered through clenched teeth. "If you look miserable, the market drops." Danny grunted, but he straightened his tie. He placed a hand on the small of her back, possessive, heavy. They walked through the revolving doors into the lobby of the Lexington. The hotel had been cleared of civilians. The lobby was empty except for the honor guard, 50 made men from both families lining the path to the elevators. It was a gauntlet. On the left, the Italians in their fedoras and wool coats. On the right, the Irish in their tweed caps and leather jackets. The air crackled with hostility. Hands hovered near lapels. One wrong move, one loud noise, and the lobby would turn into a shooting gallery. Lucia kept her head high. She nodded to the capos of her father's crew, acknowledging them not as uncles, but as subordinates. She saw the confusion in their eyes. They weren't used to seeing a woman walk with that kind of stride. They reached the elevator. The grate slid shut, sealing them in with Luca the Knife and Tommy Two Gun. The ascent to the 4th floor was silent, save for the hum of the cables. "Room 402, Luca grunted. "Presidential suite. Don Salvatore sends his regards. He says, 'Make it convincing.'" Tommy Two Gun spat on the floor. "Boss says the same. Don't disappoint the boys, Danny. We need to hear it." The crude implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. This was the reality of their royal wedding. They were performers in a pornography of power. The elevator dinged. The hallway stretched out before them, carpeted in deep red, a color that hid stains well. They walked to the double doors. Luca unlocked them with a heavy iron key. "The rules are simple," Luca said, reciting the protocol like a bailiff reading a sentence. "You go in, you stay in. No phone calls, no room service. We stand right here. At 4 a.m. we knock. You confirm. At 5 a.m. we knock. You confirm. At 6 a.m. the lawyers come with the papers. If we don't hear cooperation, we come in shooting." "Cooperation," Danny repeated, a sneer curling his lip. "You want a show, Luca?" "We want insurance," Luca replied, stone-faced. "Don Salvatore wants a grandson. Tonight is the down payment." Lucia stepped into the suite. It was opulent, decorated in the Art Deco style that was sweeping Chicago. Velvet armchairs, crystal chandeliers, a view of the city skyline glittering in the dark. But in the center of the room, dominating the space, was a massive 4-poster bed. It had been stripped of its usual duvet and remade with stark white satin sheets. The canvas. The symbolism was not subtle. The blood of the Virgin, or at least the blood of the Union, had to be visible. Lucia heard the heavy click of the lock behind her, then the sound of a chair being dragged against the door from the outside. The guards were settling in. She was trapped. She stood in the center of the room, the silence of the suite pressing against her ears. She could hear Danny breathing behind her. She could hear the radiator hissing. She turned around. Danny had taken off his jacket and thrown it on the floor. He was unbuttoning his cuffs, revealing forearms thick with muscle and grease stains that no soap could scrub away. He looked at the bed, then at her. "Well," Danny said, walking over to the minibar and pouring a glass of amber liquid. "Here we are, the cage." He downed the drink in one gulp and slammed the glass down. "You know what they expect, right? They expect me to break you. They expect you to scream." He walked toward her. He stopped inches from her face. She could smell the whiskey and the violence on him. "I don't like being told what to do, Lucy, especially by wops." Lucia didn't back away. She looked up at him, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of the street lamps filtering through the sheer curtains. "They expect a lot of things, Danny," she said softly, "but they made one mistake." "Yeah? What's that?" "They left us alone." Lucia walked past him to the window. She pulled the heavy drapes shut, plunging the room into shadow. She turned on a small table lamp, casting a golden glow across the satin sheets. "My father thinks sex is about domination," she said, unpinning the diamond brooch from her hair. "He thinks you'll use it to humiliate me, and I'll hate you for it, and that hatred will keep me loyal to him. He's counting on it." She dropped the brooch on the vanity table. It made a sharp clack. "And your men. They think you're conquering a territory. They think you're planting your flag. They think once you've broken me, the Moretti family will bow to you." She turned to face him. She began to unbutton the high collar of her wedding dress. Her movements were slow, deliberate, devoid of fear. "But what if we don't give them a conquest?" she asked. "What if we give them a play?" Danny watched her, confused. "A play? We have to make noise, Danny. We have to prove the alliance, but we don't have to give them us." She stepped out of the heavy silk dress. Underneath, she wore a simple silk slip. She looked vulnerable, small in the large room, but her posture was that of a general surveying a battlefield. "Sit down," she ordered. Danny hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed. "You're crazy, you know that?" "I'm alive," Lucia said, "which is more than your last girlfriend can say." She walked over to the minibar. She grabbed the bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. She brought them to the bed. "We have 3 checkpoints," she said, pouring him another drink. 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m. In between those times, we are going to talk. We are going to rewrite the treaty. "Rewrite it?" Danny laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "The ink is dry, doll." "The ink is dry on their treaty," Lucia said, handing him the glass. "The treaty that keeps my father in charge and makes you his muscle. I'm talking about our treaty, the one where we take over." Danny looked at the glass, then at her. The gears in his mechanic's brain were turning. He saw the logic. He saw the ambition. It mirrored his own. "You want to take out your own father?" "I want to stop being sold," Lucia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And you want to stop being hunted. We can help each other. But first—" She glanced at the door. She knew Luca and Tommy were pressing their ears against the wood. "First, we have to make them believe the show." Lucia set her glass down. She reached out and grabbed the lapels of Danny's shirt. She pulled him close. "This is going to be the performance of your life, Danny O'Banion. Try to keep up." She didn't kiss him. Not yet. She shoved him backward onto the bed. The mattress springs creaked loudly, a sound that would be clearly audible in the hallway. "Make noise," she hissed. "Hit the headboard, now." Danny, caught off guard but understanding the game, reached back and slammed his hand against the wooden headboard. Thud. Lucia let out a gasp, half theatrical, half adrenaline. "Again," she whispered. Thud. Thud. Outside in the hallway, Luca the Knife smirked and lit a cigarette. He looked at Tommy Two Gun. "Sounds like the mechanic is getting to work," Luca said. Tommy nodded, checking his watch. 3:45, right on schedule. Inside the room, the dynamic had shifted. Danny lay on the pillows, watching Lucia. She wasn't acting like a victim. She was directing the scene. She moved around the bed, creating the friction, the sounds of struggle and passion, all while keeping her eyes locked on his. "My father keeps his ledger in a safe behind the portrait in the library," she whispered, her voice low under the noise of the creaking springs. "It has the names of every judge he owns." Thud. Danny hit the headboard again, harder this time. "Why tell me?" "Because the judges are the key to the unions," Lucia whispered back. "You have the trucks. I have the judges. We cut out the middleman." "Who's the middleman?" Lucia stopped moving. She leaned in close to his ear. "Don Salvatore." The first hour passed in a blur of staged intimacy and whispered treason. They were building a conspiracy on top of a mattress. At 4 a.m. sharp, a heavy fist pounded on the door. Bang, bang, bang. "Verification," Luca's voice boomed through the wood. "O'Banion." "Status." Danny looked at Lucia. She nodded. Her hair was mussed, her skin flushed from the exertion of the charade. Danny cleared his throat. He pitched his voice to Carrie. "She's compliant," Danny shouted. "Tell the Don the deal is holding." "And the bride," Luca demanded. "Let's hear the bride." Lucia took a deep breath. She didn't whimper. She didn't cry. She let out a low, satisfied laugh, a sound that was both carnal and chilling. "I'm here, Luca," she called out. "Tell my father. The north side has plenty of ammunition." Silence from the hallway. Then a chuckle. "Roger that. Resume." The footsteps moved away from the door. Danny looked at Lucia with a new expression. It wasn't just respect, it was fear. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of attraction. "You're dangerous," he said. "I'm a Moretti," she replied, smoothing her slip. "We invented dangerous." She poured more whiskey. "Now," she said, sitting cross-legged on the bed, looking like a sphinx in silk, "let's talk about the South Side distribution hubs. I know which captains are loyal and which ones can be bought." The night was young. The first signal had been sent, but the real consummation, the merging of their ambitions, was just beginning. They had 2 more checkpoints to clear, and outside the city of Chicago slept, unaware that in room 402, a new monarchy was being conceived not in blood, but in secrets. The hour between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. is known in Chicago as the dead man's hour. It is the time when the jazz clubs finally sweep out the last drunks, when the printing presses on Tribune Tower start rolling the morning edition, and when the bodies of the night's victims stiffen in the alleyways. Inside the presidential suite of the Lexington Hotel, the air was thick with smoke and conspiracy. Lucia Moretti and Danny O'Banion were no longer sitting on opposite sides of the room. They were huddled over the vanity table, where Lucia had used a tube of blood-red lipstick to draw a map of the city on the mirror. "This is the 24th Ward," Lucia whispered, tracing a jagged line through the reflection of her own face. "My father controls the alderman, but the alderman has a gambling debt with the outfit in New York. He's weak. If we squeeze him, he flips." Danny leaned in, studying the red wax on the glass. He smelled of Old Spice and gun oil. And the unions. "The Teamsters won't move the trucks without Salvatore's say-so." "The Teamsters don't care about Salvatore," Lucia corrected him. "They care about their pension fund, a fund that my father has been dipping into to pay for his wars. I have the ledgers, Danny. If you show those ledgers to the union boss, Big Mike, he'll park every truck in the South Side until my father is gone." Danny looked at her. For the first time, he didn't see a mob princess or a hostage. He saw a strategist. He saw a woman who had spent her life listening at keyholes and reading documents upside down on her father's desk. He realized that the rumors about the Black Widow were wrong. She wasn't dangerous because men died around her. She was dangerous because she understood why they died. "You've been planning this," Danny said quietly. "You didn't just come up with this tonight." Lucia capped the lipstick. She looked at him in the mirror. Her eyes were dark, tired, but burning with a cold fire. "I've been engaged twice before, Danny. Do you know what happened to them?" "I heard stories." Danny shrugged. "Bad breaks. Swimming lessons." "My father killed them," Lucia said. The words hung in the air like smoke. "Not me. Him. He killed Antonio because he wanted a bigger cut of the numbers racket. He killed Marcus because he asked too many questions about the books. I was the bait. I was the honey trap. He used me to draw them in, make them feel safe, and then snap." She turned to face him. "I promised myself, after Marcus died, that I would never be the bait again. Next time, I would be the hunter." This revelation shifted the tectonic plates of the room. Danny O'Banion, the man who had survived bombings and drive-bys, suddenly felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Chicago winter. He realized that if he hadn't agreed to this treaty, if he had tried to dominate her, he would have ended up like the others. But by listening to her, by conspiring with her, he had become something else, an accomplice. "So what's the play?" Danny asked. "We survive the night. We walk out of here at 6 a.m. married. Then what?" "Then we start the whispers," Lucia said. "We tell your men that my father sold me to you to save his own skin, which is true. We tell my father's men that you forced me into a deal that bankrupts the South Side, which is a lie, but they'll believe it because they hate you. We create chaos, and in the chaos, we consolidate." Knock, knock, knock. The sound was violent, sudden. It vibrated through the heavy oak door. 5 a.m. Tommy Two Gun's voice roared from the hallway. "Wakey, wakey, lovebirds. Status report." Danny looked at the clock. They had lost track of time. The map on the mirror was incriminating. If the guards came in now, they would see the conspiracy written in red wax. "Cover the mirror," Lucia hissed. She grabbed a silk scarf and threw it over the glass. Danny scrambled onto the bed, messing up the sheets, kicking a pillow onto the floor to simulate a struggle. "We need to sell it, Danny," Lucia whispered, climbing onto the bed. "They're getting bored. Bored men get suspicious." "What do you want me to do?" "Make it sound like you're winning." Danny took a deep breath. He channeled every ounce of rage and aggression he had suppressed for the last 2 hours. He grabbed the headboard and shook it violently. The heavy wood banged against the wall with a rhythmic, thudding cadence. "Yeah, that's right," Danny shouted, his voice rough, performative. "You like that, Duchess? You like how the North Side does business?" Lucia picked up a heavy glass ashtray from the nightstand and threw it against the wall. It shattered with a spectacular crash. "I hate you!" she screamed, channeling the anger she felt for her father, for the system, for the cage she was in. "I hate you, you Irish bastard!" "Scream louder!" Danny roared, stomping his foot on the floor. Outside, Tommy Two Gun and Luca the Knife exchanged looks. Luca chuckled, lighting another cigarette. "Sounds like a real Italian marriage now." Luca grinned. "Breaking furniture, screaming." "Good." Tommy leaned against the door, listening. "He's breaking her in." "Good for him. Maybe she'll finally learn her place." "Status confirmed," Luca shouted back. 1 hour left. Make it count. Inside the room, the noise stopped as abruptly as it began. Danny and Lucia sat on the bed, breathing hard. The adrenaline was real. The acting had required a physical exertion that left them both flushed. They looked at each other. The distance between them had vanished. They were conspirators in a foxhole. "You have a good scream," Danny said, a hint of a smile tugging at his scar. "You have a terrible vocabulary," Lucia replied, smoothing her hair. "But you're loud." For a moment, the silence wasn't heavy. It was charged. The real passion mixed with political necessity that the Lucrezia history spoke of was beginning to manifest. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was the potent aphrodisiac of shared survival. Danny reached out and touched Lucia's hand. His fingers were rough, calloused. Her skin was soft, cool. "If we pull this off," Danny said quietly, "we run this town. No more South Side, no more North Side. Just us." "Just us," Lucia repeated. She looked at his hand covering hers. She didn't pull away. "But we have one problem," she said. "What?" "The 6 a.m. check. It's not just a knock. The lawyers come in. My father comes in. They need to see evidence." "Evidence." "They need to see the sheets, Danny. They need to see that the marriage was physically sealed. It's the old way, the Sicilian way." Danny looked at the pristine white satin sheets. They were wrinkled, but they were clean. "I'm not cutting you," Danny said firmly. "I don't hurt women, unless they shoot at me." Lucia smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, sharp and dangerous. "You don't have to cut me, mechanic. We just need red." She walked over to the vanity. She picked up the lipstick, the same lipstick she had used to draw the map. "Hollywood magic," she said. The next hour was a masterclass in stagecraft. They staged the scene of the crime. Lucia smeared the lipstick on the sheets, artistic and deliberate. She poured a little champagne on the floor to make the room smell of debauchery. She tore the shoulder strap of her slip just enough to look ravaged, but not ruined. Danny watched her, fascinated. He was learning that power wasn't just about force. It was about narrative. It was about controlling what people saw. As the clock ticked towards 6 a.m., the atmosphere in the room shifted again. The play was set. The script was written. Now they just had to wait for the curtain to rise. But as the gray light of dawn began to filter through the cracks in the drapes, a sudden terrifying thought hit Danny. "Wait," he said. "Your father, Don Salvatore, he's coming here at 6? "Yes, to inspect the merchandise. If he sees me, if he sees that I'm still alive, and if he suspects anything." "He won't," Lucia said. She walked over to him. She placed her hands on his chest. "Because you're going to be holding the gun." "What?" "When they open that door, Danny, you don't stand there like a groom. You stand there like a conqueror. You hold your Thompson. You make him fear you. If you look weak, he attacks. If you look like you just took his daughter and his empire, he'll hesitate. And in that hesitation, we win." It was a gamble, a massive gamble. Lucia was asking him to point a machine gun at the most powerful crime lord in Chicago, in a room full of his armed guards. "And you?" Danny asked. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to stand right next to you," Lucia said, "and I'm going to smile." 6 a.m. The sun broke over Lake Michigan, painting the icy skyline of Chicago in shades of bruised purple and gold. The elevator bell dinged down the hall. Heavy footsteps approached. Not just 2 men this time, a dozen. The handle of the double doors turned. The lock clicked. "Time's up," Luca's voice boomed. "Open for inspection." The doors swung open. Standing in the hallway was Don Salvatore Moretti. He wore a camel hair coat and a white fedora. He was flanked by his lawyers, his consigliere, and 10 armed soldiers. On the other side, Danny's lieutenants stood tense, hands on their holsters. Salvatore stepped into the room. He expected to see a cowering daughter and a smug, careless Irishman. He expected to see a transaction completed. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. The room was a wreck. Broken glass, overturned chairs. The bed was a mess of tangled sheets, stained with blood. And standing in the center of the chaos was Danny O'Banion. He was shirtless, sweating, looking feral. In his hands, held low but ready, was a Thompson submachine gun with a drum magazine. And draped over his shoulder, wearing his leather jacket over her torn slip, was Lucia. She looked at her father. She didn't look ashamed. She looked radiant. She looked like a queen who had just been crowned. "Morning, Papa," Lucia said, her voice cool and mocking. "You're late." Salvatore looked at the sheets. He looked at the gun. He looked at his daughter's face. He tried to read the room, but the signals were scrambled. Was she a victim? Was she a hostage? Or was she happy? "Is it done?" Salvatore growled, looking at Danny. Danny spat on the carpet inches from Salvatore's expensive Italian shoes. "It's done," Danny said. "She's mine. The territory is mine. And the treaty stands." He raised the barrel of the Thompson slightly. "Unless you want to renegotiate right now." The tension in the room spiked. Luca the knife moved his hand to his jacket. "Easy," Lucia said sharply. She slid off Danny's shoulder and stepped between the two men. She walked up to her father. She kissed him on the cheek, the kiss of death, or the kiss of a dutiful daughter. Salvatore couldn't tell. "He kept his end of the bargain, Papa," Lucia whispered. "Now you keep yours. Release the trucks." Salvatore looked at her eyes. He saw the steel there. He realized, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that he hadn't sold his daughter. He had armed his enemy, but he was trapped by his own rules. The witnesses were there. The lawyers were there. The blood was on the sheets. The ritual was complete. "The trucks roll at noon," Salvatore said, his voice tight. He turned on his heel. "Come, Luca." The Moretti entourage backed out of the room. The door closed, leaving Danny and Lucia alone with the lawyers and the O'Banion crew. A cheer went up from the North Side boys. Tommy Two Gun slapped Danny on the back. "You did it, boss. You tamed the shrew." Danny looked at Lucia. She was lighting a cigarette, her hand perfectly steady. He knew the truth. He hadn't tamed her. She had liberated him. The Lexington Alliance held for 5 years. It was the bloodiest, most profitable era in Chicago history. The North Side and South Side operated as a single machine. The police were baffled. The feds were outmaneuvered. Danny provided the muscle. He expanded the bootlegging routes, crushed the smaller gangs, and kept the streets quiet enough for business. But it was Lucia who ran the show. From the shadows of the back room at the O'Banion headquarters, a flower shop on State Street, she managed the books. She bribed the judges. She orchestrated the accidents that befell their enemies. She never held a gun. She never threw a punch. But everyone knew that the Black Widow was the one weaving the web. But history has a way of repeating itself. The higher you climb, the thinner the air. In 1931, the feds finally caught up with Al Capone, creating a power vacuum that threatened to suck everyone in. The pressure on the Moretti-O'Banion alliance grew. Paranoia set in. Danny began to drink his own supply. He started to wonder if Lucia was playing him, just like she played her father. And Lucia. She started to wonder if Danny had outlived his usefulness. The third consummation, the one that sealed the pact, had been a lie, a performance. But the power they built was real. And power, unlike love, does not share well. One night in 1932, Danny didn't come home. Lucia sat in their penthouse, staring at the phone. She knew what was happening. She had seen the signs. The mechanic was planning a tune-up. He was going to cut the brakes on their marriage. She picked up the phone. She dialed a number she hadn't used in 3 years. "Luca," she said softly. "It's Lucia. I think it's time we renegotiated my father's retirement package. And I have a job for you." The phone receiver clicked into the cradle with a sound like a gavel striking a block. Lucia Moretti stood by the window of the penthouse overlooking Lakeshore Drive. Below, the city of Chicago was a grid of electric light and shadow, a machine that never stopped grinding. It was November 1932. The Prohibition era was gasping its last breath, soon to be strangled by the repeal of the Volstead Act. The smart money was moving out of bootlegging and into unions, gambling, and construction. Lucia saw the future clearly. Danny O'Banion, however, was stuck in the past. He was still fighting turf wars over beer trucks, while Lucia was trying to buy city councilmen. The elevator doors slid open. Danny stumbled into the foyer. He smelled of cheap gin and gunpowder. His suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot and darting with the frantic energy of a trapped animal. He held a bottle in one hand and his signature Thompson in the other. "Who were you talking to?" Danny slurred, kicking the door shut. Lucia turned slowly. She was wearing a silk dressing gown reminiscent of the slip she wore on their wedding night, but this one was black. "I was ordering flowers, Danny," she said calmly. "Flowers? For who?" "For you." Danny laughed, a wet, ugly sound. He staggered toward her, waving the gun. "You think you're funny, Duchess? You think I don't know? You and your old man's crew, Luca. I see the way they look at you. They don't look at me like a boss. They look at me like a temporary employee." He smashed the bottle against the fireplace. Glass rained onto the marble. "I made you," he roared. "I took you out of that cage. And now you're plotting. You think you can cut me out?" "I'm not plotting, Danny," Lucia said, her voice dropping to that dangerous low register she used when she was negotiating. "I'm pruning. You're a mechanic. You fix things with hammers. But the machine has changed. We don't need hammers anymore. We need scalpels." Danny raised the Thompson. The barrel wavered, pointing at her chest. "Maybe I should just fix you. Maybe I should have done it that first night in the hotel." "But you didn't," Lucia whispered, "because you needed me. And you still need me. Look at the door, Danny." Danny frowned. He started to turn, but he was too slow. The service door behind the bar, the one Danny insisted on keeping locked, swung open silently. Luca the knife stepped out. He wasn't holding a knife this time. He was holding a garrote wire. Danny saw the reflection in the mirror, the same mirror they had drawn their map on years ago. His eyes went wide. He tried to swing the gun. Luca was faster. The wire slipped over Danny's head and tightened against his throat in one fluid motion. The gun clattered to the floor. Danny thrashed, his boots kicking at the expensive Persian rug, his hands clawing at the wire cutting into his neck. Lucia didn't look away. She didn't scream. She watched with the same clinical detachment she had shown on her wedding night. She watched as the man who had been her husband, her partner, and her pawn gasped his last breath. When Danny finally went limp, Luca lowered the body to the floor. He checked the pulse. "It's done, Donna Lucia," Luca said, using the title usually reserved for the wife of a Don, but applying it to her in her own right. Lucia walked over to the body. She looked down at Danny's face, now purple and still. She felt a flicker of sadness, not for him, but for the girl she had been in the back of the Cadillac, the girl who thought they could be partners. "He was a good soldier," Lucia said, "but he was a terrible general." She looked at Luca. "Clean this up. Put him in his car. Drive it into the river. Make it look like a rival hit. We'll blame the Bugs Moran crew." "And the flowers?" Luca asked. "Lilies," Lucia said, turning back to the window. "White lilies. We have a funeral to plan." The funeral of Danny O'Banion was the social event of the season. Thousands of mourners lined the streets. The procession of black cars stretched for 3 miles, and walking behind the hearse, veiled in black lace, was the grieving widow. Lucia played the part to perfection. She wept at the graveside. She threw the first handful of dirt. She accepted the condolences of the judges, the police captains, and the rival mobsters who came to pay their respects and to gauge their new enemy. They looked at her and saw a tragedy, a woman cursed. 3 fiancés, 3 deaths. The Black Widow legend was cemented, but as they walked away, they noticed something else. The men standing around her, Luca the knife, Tommy Two Gun, the captains of both the North and South sides, they weren't looking at a successor. They were looking at the successor. Lucia Moretti didn't need to seize power. She had already woven it into the fabric of the organization. The ledgers were hers. The contacts were hers. The secrets were hers. For the next 40 years, Lucia ran Chicago from the shadows. She never remarried. She lived in the penthouse at the Lexington, turning the presidential suite into her office. She diversified the family business into legitimate real estate, trucking, and waste management. When the FBI finally cracked down on the commission in the 1950s, they couldn't find a single piece of paper linking her to a crime. She was a ghost, a philanthropist, a grandmother figure to the neighborhood. The Lexington Treaty became a myth, a bedtime story told by low-level soldiers. They whispered about the night the princess and the mechanic locked themselves in a room and came out with an empire. They argued about what really happened in those sheets. Was it love? Was it lust? Only Lucia knew the truth. It was business. Lucia died in her sleep in 1971 at the age of 64. She left behind a fortune of $50 million and a diary that was ordered to be burned upon her death. However, one page survived. It was found by her lawyer, tucked inside the frame of a painting in her study. It was a sheet of hotel stationery from the Lexington Hotel, dated February 15, 1929. On it, written in lipstick that had turned brown with age, was a list of names. The names of her father's captains, the names of the judges, and at the bottom, a single line written in Danny's crude scrawl, "We take it all." And below that, in Lucia's elegant script, "And we keep it." The story of Lucia Moretti is not just a gangster story. It is a study in the alchemy of power. In a world built by men, for men where violence was the only currency, Lucia found a different way to pay the toll. She realized that the most dangerous room in the world wasn't the interrogation room or the execution chamber. It was the bedroom, because in the bedroom, guards are down, armor is taken off. And if you are smart enough, if you are cold enough, you can turn a moment of intimacy into a coup d'etat. Danny O'Banion thought he was conquering a bride. Don Salvatore thought he was selling a daughter. They were both wrong. They were handing the keys to the asylum to the only person sane enough to run it. As the sun sets over Chicago today, the Lexington Hotel still stands, a crumbling monument to a bygone era. The ghosts of the Roaring Twenties still haunt its hallways. The smell of gin, the rattle of jazz, and the phantom sound of a bed frame banging against a wall at 4 a.m. If you listen closely, you won't hear the moans of lovers. You will hear the whispers of conspirators. You will hear the sound of a woman rewriting her destiny, one lie at a time. And you will realize that in the end, the Black Widow didn't kill her mates because she was hungry. She killed them because they were in her chair.